We good?
Yep.
Okay. I don't have to wait for everybody. Now,
I can hear you when I'm moving.
Now, I don't know whether you're aware of this, but did you know that because of the way your eye's lens, the lens on your eye works, that the image that we see hits the back of your eye upside down? It's what you see is an upside down image, and your brain flips it over. So you're really on your head, exactly. That's using your head right there. I think that's really neat. But frankly, I think sometimes we have that flipping mechanism in our ears when we shouldn't. There's a scene that I don't have a copy of, therefore I could not play. But there's a scene in a movie that frankly I haven't decided whether I'm supposed to like it or not. Anybody here, if you're cultured, good people, probably not. But if you have a sense of humor like me, anybody seen Monty Python and the Search for the Holy Grail? Oh, my goodness. I think that's a hilarious movie. I'm sorry, I shouldn't. But I think it's hilarious. Anyway, there is a scene in that movie where one character is trying to tell another character what to do. And every single time he tells this character to do something, the guy says, okay, I will do, and he spits it out exactly the opposite of what he was told. Just exactly the opposite. It's just, what is wrong with it? It just gets increasingly more ridiculous. Well, I think we do this at least somewhat when we hear this. Because, at least we must, because we do things like, oh, I don't know, you should go tell people about Jesus.
Okay.
All right, thank you. And I'll come back to this question, but how many people, don't answer this question out loud, how many people to whom you are not related have you led to Jesus? Don't ask me that question, that's private. It's right here. It says go, and we don't. It says to do all kinds of things, and we don't. What is this flipping mechanism that we've got going on in our heads? And today, we are going to be looking at Jonah. A story that I suspect most of you have heard many, many times. Well, I love, and by love I mean, commonly do. How many of you have ever either watched a news story or watched a video on YouTube or read something in the Bible, and somebody does something really stupid, and you think something to yourself like, I would never do that thing. I would never make that choice. I would never think that. I would never say that. I would never blah blah blah. And sometimes you watch these videos, especially on YouTube, and you feel better about yourself, and you say, well, I would make better decisions than that, or I would never do such and such and such and such and such. And I remember being told the story of Jonah and thinking how ridiculous it was that, okay, God told him to do something and he ran the other way. How ridiculous. I would never do that. But unfortunately, sometimes it's like as if we have those lenses over our ears. For what we hear, we flip. God, we sit in church day after day, year after year, hearing what God has planned for us, what He wants us to do, And day after day, year after year, we ignore it. Go about our lives the same ways we did before. What's even better is when we don't do what He's called us to do, but we are faithfully listening to the command and feel good about ourselves for having heard it. But we don't do it. Frankly, that's normal, but we have been called to be weird. Not the definition, but a snarky definition of being a Christian is being weird. Because again, wide is the road that leads to destruction. You're supposed to be weird. To get some perspective on this phenomenon, we're going to look at the life of Jonah. I highly suspect, again, that we've all heard this story many, many times. However, I also suspect that most of us know the first chapter really well. And the second and third and fourth, not as well. It's a little bit like Job. Most of us know the Cliff Notes version. You realize that book is a long book. Mm-hmm. So this morning we are going to start a 4-part series called I Am Jonah. Hi! What may shock you as we go through the series is how much we are like Jonah in his responses, in his actions. There's a great deal to learn. When we are small, we are taught about Jonah, and probably the most normal application that we hear is how powerful God is and how you're supposed to listen to Him. Alright, that's not wrong. That's not a wrong thing to say. And that God provided a fish for Jonah, that's not wrong. The problem with that application is that it is incomplete. The application totally misses the point that Jonah, the book of Jonah, is trying to get across. Jonah is a book about mission and commission. God and God's response to us when we accept or reject His call on our lives. So if you would please turn with me to the book of Jonah. It is in your Old Testament. It is not a long book. If you're flipping, there's a decent chance you'll miss it. It's on page 1036 in my book, if that's helpful. Probably not. Not an easy book to find. But I'm going to go ahead and start reading in Jonah chapter 1, verses 1 through 2. You don't have to go, you won't miss much. The word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai. Go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it, because its wickedness has come up before me. Go and preach against a big city, because its wickedness has come up before me. Now, we don't know a great deal about Jonah before this incident. There is tradition, rabbinic tradition, that says that he was a prophet for many years before this time. But we don't know how accurate that is. It's not in the Bible. It doesn't say that in the Bible. And tradition has all kinds of things that some of it's true and some of it's not. And so you kind of have to go, maybe. But what I do know is that the word of the Lord came to Jonah. You know how I know? It says right here. And it would seem that God expected him to know what to do with this command. Go and preach to Nineveh. God tells him to go to preach to Nineveh. Now, Nineveh was a very large city in the time of Jonah. This is why it says here it is a great city. Nineveh was the capital of the Assyrian Empire. This empire would eventually overtake the northern kingdom. The people, remember, you might remember from talking about Old Testament stuff, that after the time of Solomon, the northern and southern the kingdom was divided, north and south. The northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. There are 10 tribes in the north, 2 tribes in the south, totaling 12. And you have, during the time of Hezekiah, an army comes in, attacks, and carries off into captivity a whole bunch of people from the north, and they just kind of disappear. They don't come back as much of anything. I mean, the Israel just kind of disappears, and this is how we get in the New Testament the Samaritans. These are the people left in the northern kingdom who are kind of on God, and who definitely don't worship in Jerusalem, because, again, they're the other people, the northern kingdom, and anyway, that's a whole other sermon. Here's the point, is that it's the Assyrians that come and attack them, eventually. And so this is a big army, this is a big city, this is an enemy. Go preach to them, for their wickedness has come up against me. Okay, most of you are old enough in this room, sorry Tabitha, to understand this. Cast your mind back. I'll pick a random number. 1975. Go to Moscow and preach. For the wickedness of this city has come up against me. Who's ready? Who sign up? Anybody? Anybody? How about not as far? Who wants to go to East Berlin? Ready? Let's go. I don't know what the call God has on your life is, because God has different calls on everyone's life for very specific purposes. But the general call is go. I don't know specifically to whom He's called you. I wish I did. That'd be really easy. Hey, Katie, you're supposed to go to... That'd be really easy, wouldn't it? But you're supposed to go. And sometimes He calls you to someone really easy and really simple, because they're your bridge partner. Still don't know how to play bridge. You need to teach me. And sometimes they might live in the capital of your enemy. I don't know where He has called you. But again, I remember growing up and saying, how ridiculous that Jonah wouldn't go. Well, did you go to Moscow in 1975? Not necessarily that you were called there, but my point is this. Why didn't you go? Why didn't he go? Because I'm Jonah. I have the same problems that he did. I have the same fears that he did. I have the same... It's easier to get out of Dodge than he did. Jonah is told they're wicked. Yep, he knew that. But God wants Jonah to preach to them. It'd be a little bit like, again, saying 1975, go to Moscow and preach to them because their society is collapsing because of moral decay. Can you imagine Jonah or us saying, good! Let them! Hooray! Jonah, go to Nineveh. Jonah, go to Nineveh. And we all know he went, right? Right away, right?
Right away, yeah.
Oh, he's very obedient, right?
No.
Jonah chapter 1, verse 3. But Jonah ran away from the Lord and headed to Tarshish. He went down to Joppa, where he found a ship bound for that port. After paying the fare, he went aboard and sailed for Tarshish to flee from the Lord. Now, ever since I was very small, I have wondered why Jonah fled. Again, I understood that he was... I understood that he was going to Nineveh. It could have been frightening, but come on, the Lord told you to go, so go. But again, it's so easy to ridicule him until I see myself in this story. It's so easy. Again, I know none of you have ever done this. It's so easy to watch someone else make a mistake and you go, well, I would have. You know, today I suspect, because humans are involved, I'm going to watch a football game this afternoon. And at some point during that football game, we're going to go, ugh! As if I could do better. It's easy to ridicule him until I realize that I am just as flawed, and I am just as foolish, and I'm just as easily dissuaded from doing what I know I've been called to do. Jonah received a call to go to preach to the people of Nineveh, and he refused. As Christians, we've received a call, and every Sunday we hear it, and we say, amen, yes, hooray. We still go home, we still go to work, we still go to the grocery store, we still go to our club meetings, and we do nothing for the kingdom. Don't answer out loud, but again, when was the last time you brought someone to Christ you were not related to? Don't answer that. We are no better than Jonah, perhaps even less honest. At least he knew he was running from the Lord. Because when he was asked on the boat later, we'll get there, what are you doing? Running from the Lord. Generally, when I ask Christians, how are you doing? They say, great, fine, whatever. Rarely do they say, I'm running from the Lord. How are you? God commanded Jonah to go to Nineveh, which is on the eastern edge of the known world at that time. Again, known world is an important term. Of course, somebody else knew the rest of it. You know, planes, trains, and automobiles, people. Planes, trains, and automobiles. Everyone knew there were lands beyond, but they'd not been widely explored by anyone they'd talked to. On the other hand, Tarshish was on the extreme western edge of the known world, in Spain. So get this idea. It's a little bit like me saying here, hey Roger, you've been called to go preach to the people in New York, and you hop a plane to LA. Which sometimes that's how I feel when you change planes.
Absolutely.
And now we went the correct direction at least. That we changed planes in Denver, headed out. That at least makes sense. But I love how many times I've gotten on a plane in Omaha, headed to Florida by way of Minneapolis. I've never quite. Anyway. But you're heading the wrong way. Got a little bit of a map here. So, who knows exactly where he was? I don't know because it doesn't say. But it said. But I'm guessing he lives right around here, since it says that he was from the Gath area later. He hops a ship in Joppa, headed to Tarshish. Way over here. That's a bit of a trek. This is not a afternoon, this isn't a day trip. He's supposed to be going there. You went the wrong way. And it's quite a distance. Joppa to Nineveh is about 550 miles. Joppa to Tarshish is about 2,500. He's a little bit off. He went, this is quite the scenic route. He was running from God. Or at least he thought he was. Jonah chapter 1, verses 4 through 10. Then the Lord sent a great wind on the sea, and such a violent storm arose that the ship threatened to break up. All the sailors were afraid, and each cried out to his own God. And they threw the cargo into the sea to lighten the ship. But Jonah had gone below deck, where he lay down and fell into a deep sleep. The captain went to him and said, "How can you sleep? Get up and call on your God. Maybe he will take notice of us, and we will not perish." The sailors said to each other, "Come, let us cast lots to find out who is responsible for this calamity." They cast lots, and the lot fell to Jonah. So they asked him, "Tell us, who is responsible for making all this trouble for us? What did you do? Where do you come from? What is your country? From what people are you? He answered, I am a Hebrew, and I worship the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the land. This terrified them, and they asked, what have you done? They knew he was running away from the Lord because he had already told them so. Where are you headed, Tarshish? Reason for your visit, running from the Lord. Okay. There are those who believe that Jonah ran away from God thinking that he could outrun God's range. I remember thinking how ridiculous that was as a child. And admittedly, it was common in that day to think that gods were gods over geographic areas. We've discussed that in the past. And I would love to say that Jonah had fallen, into that. But then he says, the God who made the sea. That. And he knows, later he tells them, if you throw me overboard, it will, stop. So it isn't like he doesn't know. He's still in God's jurisdiction. He knows how this is working. He doesn't think he's actually running from God. So why did Jonah do this? I have a theory. It's only a theory. But I have a theory. Have you ever worked with a group of volunteers, or even at a place where they're being paid, and every time the assignments are about to be handed out, there's that one guy who's always getting a drink, or he's always in the bathroom, or he's always doing something, or trying to look busy so he doesn't get a new assignment? I don't know who the guy or girl is that you just popped into your head, but you all know somebody. Try to look busy so I don't get a new assignment. Try to appear asleep so that she doesn't ask me to take the trash out. Frankly, my guess is that he was trying to get away so that God would ask somebody else. I'm sorry, God, I'm out of range. You could break it up, break it up. If I get out to where let me go back here. If I get to where it's utterly ridiculous that I would go to Nineveh, God will just pick somebody else. He's God after all. He'll ask somebody else. Therefore, I don't have to do it. There isn't anyone out there who might ever say, well, God will pick somebody else, so I don't have to do it, is there? Nobody else would think like that, would you? No. I think this right here is where we see ourselves the most. We as Christians have been called with a powerful commission to preach the good news to all people. All the peoples of this world. We know that. And many of us can even quote the verse that commands us to do so. Matthew 28:18-20. Then Jesus came to them and said, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you, and surely I am with you always to the very end of the age. But none of us do it. Why? Why do we not? We have been called to reach out, but most of us spend our time running away. And I think partially it is somebody else will do it. Somebody else will take care of it. I don't have time. I'm too tired. They're not my kind of people. They're frightening. They're scary. They smell funny. Or sometimes we make ourselves feel better by doing good projects. Now, what I'm about to say is not meant to say that what I'm about to say is unimportant. But some of us make ourselves busy doing good things. Raising money for the needy. Serving the homeless. These are good things. Please don't misunderstand. They absolutely need it. Or spend our time fixing up the church building, or doing any number of good things that must be done. The church building will fall down if it's not maintained. You need to cut the grass. I'm very thankful for a working furnace. Thank you. I'm very glad these things happen. But have you ever, and I know you have because you're human, have you ever said to yourself anything anywhere close to this? I've done my good deed for the day. Mm-hmm. Or I've served the Lord today, I can go home now. Anything even close to that. I know I've thought that. Sometimes we busy ourselves with good things that need to be done. We need to take care of the homeless. We need to feed the needy. We need to take care of the needy. Please don't misunderstand. I am not saying don't do that. You did not hear me say, the preacher this morning said, we don't have to take care of the needy. You did not hear me say that.
I think I did.
Yeah, okay. But what I am saying is don't use that as my excuse to not do what I have been called to do in writing. I've done my good deed. I don't need to tell them. I fed them. I don't have to tell them why. I gave them some. I helped them. I don't have to tell them why. Jonah. Someone else is not going to get them. You are the one who's been called to reach them. I don't know who the them are. That is between you and God. But you can't run to Tarshish. He's got someone in mind for you. He's got someone in mind for you. I don't know if they're related to you or not. I don't know if they're your neighbor or not. I don't know if they're a coworker or not. I don't have the slightest idea. But God has you in mind for them. And if we don't do what we've been called to do, again, I'm not going to stand in the place of God. I don't know what He has or hasn't done. I don't know. I'm not going to say that. But I do know that God went and got Jonah and brought him back. Hey, I told you to go do it. I'm going to make sure you do it. It would have been so much simpler for God to call somebody else. It would have been so much simpler. Which I think was, again, what I think Jonah was counting on. But he didn't. So can I draw the comparison of one-to-one? I'm not sure, but I will say this. There's at least a risk, at minimum a risk, that if you don't talk to who you've been called to talk to, they're going to go to a Christless eternity because you didn't do your job. Mm-hmm. That should scare the living daylights out of you. Does me. God said to Jonah, I told you to go to Nineveh. God called Jonah to do something specific, and Jonah ran the other way. God sent a storm to get Jonah's attention. Jonah knew why the storms were there. Jonah knew the storms were there for him, and they were to get his attention, to remind him who God really is. Jonah chapter 1, verses 11 through 17. The sea was getting rougher and rougher. So they asked him, What should we do to make the sea calm down for us? Pick me up and throw me into the sea, he replied, and it will become calm. I know that this is my fault, that this great storm has come upon you. Instead, the men did their best to row back to land, but they could not, for the sea grew even wilder than before. Then they cried out to the Lord, "O Lord, please do not let us die for taking this man's life. Do not hold us accountable for killing an innocent man. For you, O Lord, have done as you pleased." Then they took Jonah and threw him overboard, and the raging sea grew calm. At this the men greatly feared the Lord, and they offered a sacrifice to the Lord, and made vows to him. But the Lord provided a great fish to swallow Jonah, and Jonah was inside the fish 3 days and 3 nights. Now I can't tell you what Jonah thought was going to happen. He knew God was causing the storm because of him, and the people on the ship were innocent of his sin, and if he were to get off the ship, they would be safe. I mean, Jonah knew that God was just God, and the storm's there for him. So, okay, get me off the ship, and the ship will be fine. I don't know if Jonah thought he was going to live through this. I don't know. I mean, there isn't exactly a large precedent for submarines. Submarine travel is not exactly a thing that he was overly familiar with, I'm sure. So whether Jonah thought he was committing suicide or not has been debated. Some people have wondered, did he think that he was going to get out of going to Nineveh by killing himself in the ocean? I don't know. What I do not, but whatever, he said, all right, I know I'm here, fine. God, if you're going to get me to Nineveh, let's see how. Plop. And God provided a fish to protect Jonah and carry him back to shore. When we finally surrender to what God wants, He provides all the tools that we need to accomplish what He's called us to do. This is not a biblical quote. All right? I'm going to give you a quote. It's not a biblical quote. Came from a fellow student at school. And the discussion was going on about when God calls us to do something, how He equips us to do it. Now, I don't know that I would say it exactly the same way He said it, but I haven't found a better way to say it, so I'll say it the way He said it. That if we are afraid of doing something God has called us to do, that is the highest form of pride. Because it is not us who's responsible for getting it done. I'm afraid of not, if I go out driving and I'm afraid because it's all slick, why am I afraid? I'm afraid because my driving ability or lack thereof is going to put me in the ditch or get me home. The quality of my tires, have I maintained them well? Did I buy the right tires? Have I maintained my truck? These are questions about me. But if God has called me to do something, if God has sent me to go do something, He's going to make sure it gets done. It's not about me. Why am I afraid? I'm afraid because I can't remember that it doesn't depend on me. It depends on Him. What He's asked me to do is to be faithful and let Him do what He's supposed to do. God provided a fish for Jonah to carry him back to shore when he was finally ready to surrender to God. And God provided all the tools that he needed to get back to shore. Next week we will get back to the story of Jonah, but I think it's very critical that we not miss the message of the first chapter. God called Jonah. He is calling you. Do not run, but embrace the call in your life. God called Jonah. He is calling you. Do not run, but embrace the call in your life. Now don't misunderstand me. It is God who saves. It is God who builds His church. But He has chosen to work through you. If this church or any church dies, it is not God's fault. It is the fault of us. It is far too easy to sit back and let someone else do our job and take our responsibility. But we will not be happy with the results. God has called us to reach Red Oak, and to be honest, we